All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining this webinar. So I'm gonna, you guys all know me, I'm Thein of RedBar. I'm gonna hand it over to David Sharp from our London and etc. UK chapters to introduce our guest today.
Oh, as Catherine says, good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Good to see you all here, and I'd like to introduce today. We've got two people here joining us from Ming. We've got KM and we've got Ming joining us, who are going to talk us through the brand and a bit of background chat. As always, remember, there's the Q&A button. Please feel free to submit questions, which we can pose to the guys as we go along. And I'll hand over to you guys to say hello and start away.
Okay, well, hi everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm going to keep it simple because I think there's a very long version to our story and a very short version to our story. But basically, we make watches because we liked watches. We were naive enough to think that we could do a better job than most people. And you know, that's a very naive thing to go in thinking, because you obviously don't know what the challenges are going to be. You don't know what the difficulties are going to be. And then, you know, you keep asking the what if questions. So it started off, personally for me, I guess in the early 2000s, around 2000, 2001. I remember trying to look for something interesting to buy, and doing my research, because being a student at the time, you know, spending my pounds very carefully, and it just turned out that I stumbled upon a couple of forums called Time Zone and the Purists, and that was back in the early days of internets, when forums were still a thing, and met a lot of interesting people that way, got a lot of interesting knowledge that way, and then realized that those, you know, that really interesting watch that has a lot of gears and makes chiming noises on the hour, that cost more than the house. So that was the entry to the deep end for me. And I remember meeting a lot of the characters back then in those few years. I mean, the people whom now have gone on to be, I guess, very serious in the industry. You know, people who've gone on to found RedBar, people who've gone on to work at Dinky, Phillips. I mean, every time we move around in the industry now, it's interesting, because you see a lot of people from that era who sort of doubled down, tripled down, and gotten very serious. And of course, amongst this group is also the founding group for me. So with the exception of one member, I think I've known everybody for about 15 years plus at this point. You know, I remember when some of the other people who shall not be named still had hair. You know, I remember when some other ones were thin. I remember when some were single. You know, it was a long time ago. But the watch thing sort of stuck with us, and eventually we got to a point where we thought, you know, maybe the time is right to try doing something. And the question of what that something was is tricky, because you could go in at the very high independent end and say, look, I'm going to try and make things that are very unique, very handmade, very artisanal, not very accessible. But you know, from a business sustainability point of view, that doesn't really give you a long runway. On the converse end, I mean, we being business people ourselves in other backgrounds, in other fields, we looked at business models like Dan and Wellington and said, look, that's great. What they're doing is very interesting from a business point of view. From a horological point of view, not really. But you know, give them props for getting more people interested in watches, just like smartwatches, right? Give them props for getting more people interested in watches. And we eventually decided to go back to where I guess our starting point was, and trying to figure out if we could make something that was interesting from a serious collector's point of view, but at the same time accessible and how should I say this? We didn't want to try and follow any of the existing trends at the time. So nothing big. Didn't have to be an oversized diver. Didn't have to be automatic. Didn't have to be on a bracelet. Didn't have to have a blue dial. Well, we made a blue dial anyway. But you know, that landed up being 1701, and from starting the discussion in 2014 to when the watch actually showed up, I think that was about 3.5 years. So the gestation period was long. The gestation period for any of our watches now continues to be long, because we want to make sure that we don't have any regrets. We want to make sure that the designs stand the test of time, or at least the degree of test of time that we can we can reasonably put in, right? I mean, I would love to be able to say have things mature for 5 years, but the reality is we have to launch them because we've burnt the R&D. We don't want to get jumped by other companies in terms of design language and look and feel and everything else. So we want to, I mean, the watch industry in that way is a bit of an open door secret. So you want to make sure that if you have something fresh, that it's not new for the sake of being new, it's not different for the sake of being different. But at the same time, you don't want to come back to it 6 months from now and go, oh boy, that's a big heap of buyers from us. I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all been there. And I think one of the great strengths of our founding group of 6 is that we have such diverse tastes. And we've owned so many different things. And we've got so much collective buyers remorse. I think we probably could buy that minute repeater, actually. It's one of those things. Funny enough, nobody actually owns a minute repeater within the group. Or at least if they do, they're not saying anything.
Yeah,
no, I'm wrong. Sorry, one of us does own a minute repeater. One of us does own a minute repeater. And we're all very jealous of that. It's one of those things that started off as a, can we make one? Can we make it work? And then it snowballed into, we're 2.5, nearly 3 years in. We've launched 15 models. We just did our first alpha thin in the first and the second generation design language, which takes a 1701, 1706, and basically evolves them in a more reductivist, minimalist sort of way. And then we've got 2 more launches for this year. Between 4 and 5 for next year, depending on what's ready when and how things go. And that includes a new flagship. It includes things which are basically re-looking at our lineup again in the second generation design language. And I think one thing that everybody's gonna be want to. Sorry about that. One thing that everybody's probably wondering is what happened to the dive concept we did last year. And I'm pleased to announce that that will be launched around August. So keep your eyes out. Actually, I'm waiting for the prototypes to be here anytime this week. So exciting times.
Is that been a watch that's had a kind of a longer kind of development or gestation because it's a dive piece?
It's had the longest gestation of the lot. I mean, we started design shortly after we signed off on 1701, so that would have been back in mid-2016, actually. The thing with designing a diver is that it's such a well-defined category, right? Everybody has their expectations of what a diver should be. If you go outside that, then you compromise functionality, and because we've got 2 people who actually dive on our team, they said, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. Okay, fine. So now what? So basically finding a new way of expressing our design language, functionality of a diver, and not relying on anything that's been done before, that was tricky. And we went through so many iterations. I think there were 8 or 9 major design branches, and something like 200 plus variants of that in the end. To the point that when we did eventually decide on the Abyss, the supply for that blue ceramic bezel had a very, very long waiting time. So long to the point that basically we would have to launch the diver, towards the middle of the end of our second generation design language, but with first generation design. So that didn't make sense. We went back to the drawing board and redid it again. I mean, it was a painful exercise, but in hindsight, I'm kind of glad we did because the final result looks, I think it's a bit more mature than what we initially came up with.
Nice, excellent.
And that's not it, by the way.
That'll be something exciting to see. So you're talking around about August for that?
Yes. Should coincide with our 3rd anniversary, plus minus a couple of weeks, depending on when the Swiss summer holidays fall this year. Yes.
Again, is that going to be in a similar vein in terms of numbers to previous models, where you obviously have done some limited edition models, but a lot of your models, I wouldn't say they're limited, but there's a limited volume. Is this going to follow the same vein?
Okay, I'd love to address that limited volume question because other than things we designate as specifically being limited, right, where we have a very small number like 25 or 10 or 12 or however many it is, we don't want to limit it. The first series of 1701s was limited because we didn't actually have the possibility to make any more. We didn't want to overpromise. We also didn't want to overcommit on the supply side. With the other models, I think something like 1703s, they were retired. The anniversary editions were actually limited because we made them for our first anniversary. I mean, there are other models like the the 1901 has actually gone through 2 additional batches. The 1706, we want to make more, but we have a movement supply issue at the moment. You know, ETA being ETA, Swiss Comco being Comco. You know, honestly, it's anybody's guess as to when we're going to get movements. And even though theoretically there are drop-in replacements available from Sellita, it's not 100% drop-in. So some things like the hands, for instance, they look like they're the same. They're almost the same, but the conicality and they're all slightly different. So there are parts changes required. I think there's also a perception difference between the 2 movements. So we want to try and keep that consistent where possible within the line. Honestly, from a collector's point of view, I don't want to put out something that people really want and can't buy. That's silly. You know, and from a business point of view, that's extremely silly. But the reality is sometimes we just can't make anymore because there are no movements. Or there are movements, but the movements are available at a price that would make the whole thing unfeasible. I mean, we had some supply offers for 2824s in the spec that we wanted, but you know, that would have meant that by the time we go through the modifications needed, because we don't have a second ground position, for instance, we'd be looking at adding another 500 francs to the price of 1706, which doesn't make sense, right? It's not the same watch at that price. So I don't want to go and offer something that looks like, you know, oh, it was popular, so you're taking advantage of that. But the reality is, if the movement's costing 2 or 3 times as much, we have no choice, right? So going forward, I mean, we provision as much as possible to try and have movement supply for 2nd, 3rd generation and a 2nd to 3rd run. You know, for instance, there will be a 2nd run of 2701s. I think when we ran out of stock, there were about 600 or 700 people trying to check out at that point. So I'm sorry to everybody who didn't get one, but we will be doing another run next year because we've managed to secure some movements. It's just that the delivery for those is a bit later, plus we've got lead times with everything else. So there will be a 2nd run. We try to make 2nd runs where possible. It's just that up to this point, given the situation in the industry, it's not been possible. We don't want to be a brand that just does limited editions. That makes no sense. It just annoys everybody.
Yeah. Oh, so really, it's a supply chain issue more than anything, and a lot of times.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
One of the most interesting things we've learned on this journey is that for an industry that's centered around timekeeping, the Swiss industry aren't very good at keeping time themselves.
Time is a very flexible commodity with them.
Yes.
Yeah, and movements are a commodity, as you say. If supply is rare, the price can vary dramatically on those. So trying to maintain a consistent price for a product is difficult.
It's easy if you have the financial flexibility to be buying, you know, thousands of movements at one go. But basically, we don't. I mean, we're a small brand. That's the reality. We don't.
Yeah. So on talking about the new model, the 27, obviously that's a big step forward in terms of design language. It's kind of, as you say, it's your 2nd generation, but you know, it's also moving up into a slightly different price category as far as its kind of selling prices.
Yes.
Can you maybe give us a bit of background on that? Because I think it would be fair to say it was very well received, and as you say, you could probably have sold it 3 or 4 times over. But you know, I think people were slightly surprised by the kind of different price point on it compared to where you were at with the 17. Can you maybe give us a bit of background on the whole kind of journey of moving into that watch and that different 2nd generation?
Sure. I mean, let's start from a design point of view first, right? If you take a 1701 and a 1706, you change the markers. So you change the numbers on the indices to markers. Differentiate those markers so you can easily tell, you know, which are which, right? Then basically you get the ring which we've gotten to, right? So the indices, I think derivation is clear. The separation of the central zone and the outer zone, I think that's also clear, but because the watch is an ultra thin, remember it's a reductionist sort of concept. We didn't have enough height to put the sapphire disc in. So what we did instead is we represented that depth by having a different tone to the chapter ring. And the indices are actually deep etched into that chapter ring. And there's this very nice transition that happens between the bright polish of the case, the sort of mid-grade dial of the chapter ring, and then the dark anthracite of the central area. The hands we took actually off the 1901. We left the segmentation of the hour hand for legibility. Again, conceptually, it's a dress watch, so you don't have luminous material, and it's the first watch we produced with no luminous material, actually. but because the indices and the hands are both matte blasted, they're still very legible. They pick up light at all sorts of angles. Okay, the case side profile is very much a 17. It's thinner. It's had some material removed. Crown's 17. Now the bit that becomes complex is once a watch starts getting thinner, and the thinner it gets, the more exponentially difficult it is to assemble in terms of tolerances and making sure that things stay sealed, things stay rigid. We still have 50-meter water resistance on this watch. It's tested to 50% over. So theoretically, not that I'm encouraging this because the strap will go, but you could dive with it theoretically.
I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I know, but you're the one who dives with the 1902, so I'm not saying anything. No, the point is we wanted to take everything a step further. So actually, it's not just the finishing quality, it's not just the detailing, but the part quality is also very different. So the supplier we use for the 17s is not the same supplier of cases we're using for the 27. In fact, the 27 uses the same cases as the 19. So yes, from relative to a 1706, a 2701 looks a little bit more expensive, but relative to a 1901, 1902, actually it's really good value for money, because when you look at what we've done with the movement, actually we showed a lot of people early prototypes, and they basically said, "Did you guys make your own movement?" I said, "No. I mean, it's on the back. It says 7001 M1." But we reworked it so heavily that basically in the end we ended up remanufacturing all the bridges in place. We just kept the wheels. And you can't buy those as a spare part, so we have to buy the whole movement, throw away a lot of it, and then start all over again. Right. So I think by the time we're done with the movement cost is actually the complete movement cost is about 4 times the basic bare e-watch cost, and there's no way that's going into 17. There's no way, because the movement cost is comparable to the 17 cost by itself.
Really, it's
sorry, David. Just to that point, the 2701, the ambition behind that particular watch and design was to make the elegant, ultra-thin watch with a display back. And while the bridges and all the rework to fit the aesthetics that Ming had intended, there is a reason why we started from that standpoint, and it was something to show off. So it differs very much from the 1701, both in terms of the philosophy behind the design as well as what went into it, and it's not a case of just trying to do more for the sake of doing more. Actually, I've held this outdoors.
So
I should have done that outdoors. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. No, it's not. Sorry, guys. It's like 9:30 in the evening on Thursday night.
So I mean, in regards to the 27, there's a lot of kind of design movements forward from the existing 17s, etc. But it's using maybe a lot of the technologies that's trickled down from your much higher end pieces.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's maybe.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say that's maybe the point. I think that maybe some people missed is that there's a lot of the technology in it that's trickled down rather than a kind of iteration of the previous model.
Yeah, it's not an iteration of the previous model at all. I mean, it was a clean sheet design, which we did entirely with Schwarz-Etienne. So basically, every quality control step or every specification step, tolerance step, everything we go through for the 19s also applies to the 27. So I would look at it as a 19 light as opposed to a 17++. I mean, design-wise, it's a 17++. Quality-wise, it's a 19 light. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I think the idea is to bring all the, the quality standards we would like across the range. I mean,
yes.
There's no point intentionally trying to make a cheaper watch just for the sake of it. I mean, it's not something we can stand by.
Yeah,
but we're always aiming for value. I mean, there's a lot of confusion these days between price and value. So something that's very cheap and you never wear, that's crappy value because you never wear it, right?
Absolutely. Something's only valuable if you get wear or use out of it.
Exactly. But conversely, if somebody offered you a Mona Lisa legitimately for $100 million, I think that's good value because you turn around and sell it for, I don't know.
Absolutely, it's all relative.
So relative to whatever price point the product is at, we try to deliver good value, basically. So it doesn't matter where that price point is. I mean, if for whatever reason one day we do a $600 watch, it'll be good value for $600. If one day we do a $100,000 watch, it'll be good value for $100,000.
Yeah,
that's
good. Well,
That's
there's actually a question come in, and obviously we've mentioned dive watches a little bit. We
Yep.
have an anonymous attendee asking if there is any news on the rubber straps being ready.
Well, that's contingent on operations resuming back to normal in France. So we will let everybody know as soon as they are ready. You know, honestly, we're quite excited about this because they're not your normal rubber straps. We wanted originally to have your typical injection molded rubber strap, and after making some prototypes of that, firstly they weren't that comfortable, and secondly they were horrendously expensive to make. To do the quality we wanted. I mean, we're looking at the same supplier who does the AP rubber straps for the Royal Oak and the GP Laureatos and things like that. But they were really expensive. I think the tooling cost is something like 20,000 francs, and then we're looking at we were easily looking at 150, 160 franc cost just for the injection molding. So by the time you make, well, you've got to make about 500 plus to make it worthwhile. By the time you've done that, it's a very, very expensive product, and honestly wasn't quite what we wanted. So in the end, we worked with Jean Rousseau to use the same natural rubber we used with lining, but now we have a waterproof infill. So basically, the strap has a rubber lining, waterproof rubber infill, and rubber on top. It's constructed in the same way as our regular straps, so they fit like regular straps. You've got the curved ends, you've got quick release bars and everything else. But the nice thing is we've got a lot more color flexibility, so you can have different contrast edge painting. You've got different top, different bottom. We've got a lot more variety to play with, and you know, they should be comparable cost-wise to our leather straps. And it's something where, you know, I didn't have to commit to a mold, which basically, if we needed to make a short one, we've got to get new tooling, and we have to buy another mold. I mean, obviously that didn't really make sense. So soon. Yeah. Sorry, but soon. I mean,
yeah.
it's
No. I think it's quite nice though that you've got the story again staying with, because one of the big things with your kind of range of watches has been both the straps and you know, and the leather pouches and leather work that's come with them. You know, I think that's a big. I think it's always about the details, but the straps, that's, you know, that's a big thing, you know, in terms of even from your very first piece with the 2 lug holes. I think that's maybe worth kind of bringing up, because I don't necessarily know folk are completely familiar with that and the reasoning why you did that.
So actually, the 1701 had only one set of lug holes. Because the lugs are so short, you could not physically fit a straight bar across without hitting the case or running out of lug at the other end, right? 1703 introduced 2 lug holes because at that time we had a bracelet, and the bracelet needed a straight bar. And then we obviously want a curved bar for the strap fitting, because if you put the straight bar in, then it looks a little bit disjointed. And we had that very nice fit between the strap and the case edge, which if we go with a straight strap, you're obviously going to have this sort of gap that doesn't quite look right. It's not the same. So in order to retain that, we put 2 sets of lug holes in. And we also realized that coincidentally, some people like to use their own straight straps on the thing. So, okay, that gives you some options. We retained that for the 1706 because it proved popular. The 1706 is actually going to be the last watch with 2 sets of lug holes, and the reason for that is because we have a universal bracelet coming. It's 20 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. It'll fit all of our watches, and it's probably going to be the first bracelet ever made with a curved quick release spring bar that fits like a strap. So we no longer need to have 2 sets of holes, basically. And more important than that, I don't want to have 2 sets of holes and have people install the bracelet incorrectly, because there's a risk that it will drop out. It can go in diagonally, and you don't want that to happen. So we will. I mean, we're basically going forward, we're dropping the 2 sets of lug holes because we just don't need them.
Excellent.
It's also taking a lot of the experience, you know, you have as fellow watch collectors over time, the things that you would like to have, and you know, they're all engineering challenges along the way. So if we can, you know, build the better strap ends, why not? You know, it makes the whole watch collecting, it's complemented the whole watch collecting experience.
I think beyond that, the bracelet is an interesting thing to mention, because a lot of the time people buy the watch with a bracelet because you don't want to go back later and buy it buy it as a separate accessory because it's expensive. But you don't always wear it, and you like the interchangeability of having straps. And we have this dilemma ourselves. So a lot of the time we'll buy a watch with a bracelet and then find that we don't use it that much, or we land up buying straps anyway. So one of the solutions I wanted to have is a bracelet that fits basically everything we've made up to this point. So you can buy one bracelet and you can interchange it between all of your watches. And I think that's something interesting. And it looks like it's meant to fit all of the watches because the design language is consistent as well.
Yeah. Have you ever considered a deployant for the leather as well?
Yes, we looked at plenty of them. And the simple answer is we couldn't find one that didn't make the buckle side of the watch thicker than the head. And that's just not very elegant. I've been working on some ideas for a deployment, which I'm not 100% sure it's going to be comfortable, but it doesn't increase the thickness. We may or may not prototype that at some point. I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm quite happy with where the pin buckles are. They're comfortable, makes the watch easy to store. The thing's fairly low profile. You know, we spent a lot of effort into engineering the pin buckle such that even the angle at which the pin bends is done in such a way that it puts not so much stress on the strap, so your straps last a bit longer and they sit flatter.
Yeah, that'd be because
yeah, I wouldn't say no outright, but you know, no probably just means it takes a little longer with Ming.
yeah, I think.
Which means you give me until Friday, basically. Oh wait, that's tomorrow.
Yeah, because I was looking at my 1701 and the strap and the thickness of the strap, and I couldn't any. There's probably only one point put on this that would not make it too thick or uncomfortable. So, but yeah, that most of these are I love deployants, but they're just most of them are uncomfortable.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a C-Series Royal Oak Jumbo at one point that I ended up selling for not a lot of money, honestly, because having small wrists, the deployant sits all the way over to one side, couldn't take out any more links, and it was just unbearable. You know, I wish I'd kept it, and you know, sold it maybe this year or last year, and made a killing on it. But no,
well, one interesting addendum. I mean, you know, Kathleen mentioned the strap on the 1701. In this time, Ming had AutoCAD designs, you know, drawings for the straps themselves. So it is not something.
No, it was Photoshop back then. We only moved to 3D CAD last year. Yep. Well, slightly year before me, but basically we've only been running 3D CAD for not that long. Actually, on the 1701 strap, I apologize because that's probably the worst strap we've got. Those were the first supplies we worked with. They are a little bit hard.
Well, to be fair, it's broken. This one's pretty broken in. So,
but even then, they're a little bit hard. So I'll be the first to admit that they're a little bit hard. The Nubuck Alcantara and the textured red, green, blue strap pack, which we did with 1703, those are a bit better because we were using the supply that makes the Panerai Solamente straps, and then after that we switched to Genre So for everything across the board, and those are really good.
yeah,
we don't need breaking it anymore.
Yeah, the strap on this one is very comfortable with the lining.
Is that that's a BB, right? I can't quite see it on.
Yeah, it's a BB.
Yeah, so that's a Genre So.
There you go.
Very
how's your
comfortable.
case holding up, by the way?
Sorry, how's that?
How's your case holding up?
Well, I'm OCD, to be fair, so I'm probably not the best person to ask. But yeah, very well.
Good.
It's got a little bit of patina on the back just from against my wrist, but yeah, other than that, it's all good.
Good.
Fantastic.
It's not, it's not actually bronze, right? It's electrolytically treated titanium.
Yeah, I do remember reading your. I read and appreciated the very specific email about the coating with the watch.
Yes, because what everybody doesn't realize is that when you buy one of those heat blue watches, they will actually scratch. It's unavoidable because you have or electrolytically treated or whatever it is, and basically because you have a titanium oxide coat on the top that forms, and it's only so thick. Basically titanium has a molecular structure such that once the thing is formed, it doesn't continuously penetrate through. So it's like aluminum in that sense. It's a solid impermeable coat. Yeah. It's not like iron, which is porous, and basically that's why things, once they start rusting, they keep rusting all the way through.
Yeah, I luckily have the blue as well, and it's actually been quite robust, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, Ming nearly set fire to the office on several occasions, playing around with the oven and stuff. So
there's a story behind the blue, right? We were sitting in the previous office and having a cigar one day, and the torch, the cigar torch, we've got this massive thing with like a creme brulee torch. So King watch. I was like, hey, it's a titanium buckle. I mean, maybe we can do something with it. Sure enough, it worked.
As you will when you've got nothing
and then
better.
we did more buckles, and eventually we moved on to trying case. And then I realized that doing a case is very difficult and very different to doing a buckle because the thicknesses are different, so the heat capacity is different, and it heats up and oxidizes differently.
Metal inconsistency.
We even tried doing a couple of bracelets, and that drove me mad because you've got to completely disassemble every link, glue them, then try and match them back again color-wise, at least with a gradient, if not identical, and reassemble the whole thing without scratching it. I think we made maybe 3 bracelets in total, and I ended up using 20 bracelets for parts. It was the most stupid thing we've ever done.
And then decided it wasn't the best idea.
Bad idea. Bad idea.
That's how we learn.
So back to the bracelet that you're talking about before, that's going to have the curved spring bar. When is that going to be available, and will
it will fit? Yes, it will fit. Number 1, it will fit. Number 2, it should be available with the diver, though I'm not sure whether we're going to put them up at the same time or not, so they don't get lost. But yeah, people take around there.
I think that is the most exciting aspect of the design. The fact that the bracelet will be compatible with all watches that we've made.
Actually, talking about bracelet engineering, I think that's something very, very unappreciated by most people. So a case. Yeah. A complex case, a really complex case, might have 30 parts, including screws, gaskets, everything, right? Something like a 1706 has, let's see, there's 10 screws, 2 gaskets, 3 main parts. What are we up to now? So that's 15. The front crystal, so it's got 16 parts, right? That's a relatively complex case. Then there's a crown as well, crown tube. That's 2 more. A bracelet like the one we did on the 1703, it has 156 parts, and that's before you count the pins and screws. And they all have to have a certain amount of clearance, right? Because if it's too much, it becomes floppy and flexible, and you think things cheap. If it's too tight, it binds and it doesn't flow, so it's not comfortable on the wrist. But then your wrist is not cylindrical, so what we need is, you don't want lateral play this way in the links, but you need twist this way in order to conform to a slightly conical wrist. And that actually means the sides are not perfectly parallel. Engineering that and putting that to production is very tricky. I mean, we're talking about 20 micron tolerances in certain places, at least in the conicality of certain parts. I think the new bracelets even worse.
I think that's a really good point, though. You say people do underestimate or value bracelets, because a well-engineered, well-designed bracelet really can make or break a watch.
And the clasp. The clasp was also equally important. I mean, one of the things I think we've been through 4 or 5 clasp designs at this point. I mean, it's the first one I've designed. The case factory the bracelet factory has come back and said it's actually the same as the case factory. So that gives you an idea of where the bracelet's coming. The bracelet is actually coming from the case factory which makes the 19s and the 27s. So that's the level of bracelet we're talking about.
Yeah. I was going to make the same.
Actually, the same case factory is also making the diver. So basically, this bracelet has an all-new clasp that we designed. It's been through so many iterations to get the mechanics right, to get the thickness right, to get the feel right, the tension, everything else. It's got more parts than the 1703 bracelet because the links are shorter, so you've got more adjustability. It'll have the same reversible clasp, so but there's an interlock so that the bracelet doesn't twist at the clasp end. And if you prefer to close 6 first or 12 first, you can flip it around. There's a 2/3 link that gives you 2.5 millimeter adjustment increments, things like that. And it's all very low profile.
Sounds exciting then.
Yes.
So we've obviously talked a lot about the kind of your entry level pieces and your kind of newer piece, but obviously you also have another piece at the top end of your range. Two indeed. So maybe they've been labours of love for you guys as well.
They've been quietly successful. I think they've been quietly getting us a little bit of credibility in terms of, yes, we make 17s. That's what most people see. Now we make 27s, and we have the diver. But the 19 has been in the lineup, close to being at the start, right? We went from 1701 to 1901, and I know there was a lot of backlash about how dare you make a go up 10 times in price? Well, that's not the same watch. And I don't want to be making 17s all the time, because if we made 17s all the time, then people would say, all you do is 17s, and you have even less justification of making a 19 later on. So the 19's been in our lineup all the time. We've actually got one more coming at the end of the year. And there'll be a new flagship that sits above all of that next year. So exciting, more exciting technology coming, more exciting details coming. But the 19 is a very different philosophy, right? With the 17, we start with a target price point and a concept and say, we got to make it work at this price point. What can we put in? How far can we push it? With the 19, we say, what do we want conceptually? What's it going to cost us to make? And then what is the minimum we can sell it for in order to make it worthwhile from a business point of view and in order for us to provide support continuously going forward and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a different design philosophy. The 19 is more like an open design experiment as opposed to something that's, we make it with a very clear concept in mind and a price ceiling.
Great. So, in regards to new projects, you say you've got a few coming through this year, and then you get more into next year. What kind of timescale are you working on beyond that? Is that as far as you've got, or are you working much further in advance?
David, there's a wall.
Okay, there's a wall in the office. Just give me a second.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the wall.
That's the wall. It's not very clear deliberately, but that's the wall, right? So.
Yes.
I don't know whether you can count the number of things on there, but each one of those is a distinct design variant.
40?
It's a model. It's not even a design variant. I think we've got about 50 things in the works at the moment. I can say that we've finished all the second generation stuff, which takes us up to 2023, 24. I'm working on third generation now.
I think
it's coming beyond that. So I think our challenge is not finding new ideas or making new watches. The challenge is how do we stagger production in such a way that we can afford to make them. Secondly, how do we not release things too quickly so that people have time to appreciate them before we start deprecating the old models. And there is always that balance you have to strike between you don't want the old one to be worse. It's not worse, it's different. The new model is usually something that it has an origin from one particular idea or something like that. And that idea might have been different to the original series. So there are things that we improve from a technical standpoint. Maybe it's tolerances, maybe it's QC, maybe it's chronometry standards, maybe it's packaging, maybe it's design details, whatever that may be. Maybe it's quality of this material. But there are a lot of things where it's a philosophical change as much as an improvement, right? So honestly, I can't say whether what we're thinking of as the third generation now is actually going to be the third generation. Just like when we started designing a second generation, it didn't really look like what the second generation is now. And this is a continuous process of evolution, not just from interacting with our customers and interacting with our fans and seeing what the world likes at a given time, but also where our personal tastes are going. Which watches are we wearing more? What would we like to see more of? What ideas do we have? What things would we like to try? So it's a fairly fluid process, but I would say comfortably, if I stopped designing today, we would have watches out for the next 7 to 8 years, assuming we keep the same frequency of release.
I was just going to do a quick check on the attendance list. I mean, I'm wondering if any of our production partners are actually watching this because, just everything.
Well, we actually had our quarterly planning call. Well, it's supposed to be, usually it takes 3 days in Switzerland, but obviously nobody can travel at the moment. So we had our quarterly planning call yesterday. That ran on. Let's say it's one of the few calls that I've been on that incorporated a meal break.
Sorry, just a final thought. I mean, one important distinction to make. I mean, you saw the wall with the 40, 50 designs. It's great that the R&D process helps surface a lot of things, and not every design makes it into production. But unless you do try and explore the limits, I mean, you won't know what you can achieve or do something better. So yeah, it's staggering. But of course, we would love to share as much as we can with the rest of the world. yeah, like Ming mentioned, I think for all practicalities, not everything is possible in this time. Yeah.
No, and some things that are possible, we prototype, we decide not to do. I mean, I'm wearing another one of the diver variants now. We decided not to do.
That's non-canonical.
It's non-canonical. Yes, it's non-canonical, and it's the only one of its kind.
Yeah.
And it doesn't leave the office for that reason.
But I think one of the gentlemen asked if there are any leftover 1706s. I mean, I'll say, look, the funny thing is, after about 3 years into this, looking across the 6 founders, I can't say that any one of us have a single piece of everything we've made, and invariably, look, we get into.
I don't have production pieces for most of the watches, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
and the first time, I remember. But I remember the first time I was talking to, I think it was either Max or one of the other independents. But basically, the first time I spoke to them, I was like, "So do you keep one of everything you've made?"
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Firstly, we're always testing the next thing, and then on top of that, you just can't afford to. I mean, eventually, if you have so many, watches, right? There comes a point where you go, look, you know what? At this point, I think we need to start releasing them to the public. Also,
and I think it's just the life cycle of brands and institutions. I remember at a dinner in Singapore, Max Buser himself lamented that the one watch that he wishes he had at the time was I think it's HM2, the black box, the one in collaboration with Silverstein. And I think he made only 8 pieces. He never got to keep one for himself. At that dinner, 2 of the watches appeared. So it's one of those things.
Why is it always Singapore? Because we did an event in Singapore a little while back, and 6 of the Ultra Blues appeared. 6.
Yeah.
Out of 25, 6.
Island fever. So yeah, I mean you look at the you look at the.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers. I mean, you look at the Ford GT. They sold all the molds and the rights to the name originally. Decades later, they can't even beg to buy it back. I remember that there was an Aston Martin exhibition going around the world, and there's this Japanese gentleman whose full-time job is actually to tour with the Aston Martin brand, because it turns out he has the largest collection of all vintage racing Aston Martins that they ever made since the Type A. And even Aston Martin themselves don't have the key parts of their heritage. And I mean, there's a chap in London who, out of the blue, one day he sent us a picture. No explanation. I think it's a very Facebook sort of thing, but it's a picture of every 17 series watches we've ever made to date in one sitting collection. And I mean, I was gobsmacked. I mean, that was a very big thank you, an amazing thing to see someone go out. I think maybe half the watches he probably bought off us, but the other half could only.
Yeah, that's why we didn't know. That's why we didn't know, because we would notice somebody who comes back that often.
So someone went through a lot of effort to really assemble that collection. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it must be a very nice feeling when you find people buying into your brand and your design and your.
We
can't quite take him on the wall with this now, but I mean maybe the cheese sandwiches when we're in London is fine.
It's actually buying into. Sorry, I just want to stop you there. You're saying buying into a brand. I think there's almost this, in some ways, a weird association between branding, marketing, and something that's not quite real. I mean, I prefer to think of it as you agree with that philosophy. Your patrons supporting the dream, right? Because we're guys who start off as collectors. We wanted to make watches that were interesting to us. It turns out that they're interesting to a lot of other people like us. So basically, our customers are really patrons supporting the dream and letting us continue to explore that space and continue to make stuff, right? I mean, it's without that, we can't do it.
Yeah.
So
thank you, everyone. Yeah. One important distinction is, I mean, we've collectively, we have a lot of our own experiences as people who are hobbyists in the world of watches. And I think, look, it sounds a bit cliche, but I think our approach is we like to be able to share with the people engagers exactly what we put into these things, the thought processes. And when I started as a nascent watch collector, it was always the quest for knowledge, stumbling along the way, hoping not to make certain mistakes. Well, some, like Ming mentioned, the bias remorse.
It's okay, we'll remind you. Don't worry. That's what you've got friends for.
it's it's one of those things that among the team, everyone's got a nickname. We name you after the watches, the horrible watch you bought in those days when you don't know better. So yeah.
Oh man, there are some bad ones.
I think at the end of the day, you can look at it at the website on Ming's blog. We try to share as much as possible. I mean, you may not always agree or with the things they have, but I think if we all can walk away and say, I learned something new, yeah, then that advances horology beyond just merely buying watches on its own can do.
Very much so. There's actually there's a couple of questions. I'm just conscious we're coming towards the hour in 10 minutes, so there's a couple of questions here. Manesh is asking if you could share a bit more information on the Mosaic dial.
Okay, the Mosaic dial is something which is still experimental. Okay, to be honest with you, there are production repeatability concerns we have that basically mean it's not quite ready for prime time. I know we were a little bit cheeky launching it on the 1st of April because I wasn't sure whether anybody would believe this, but it's a 1.3 to 1.6 millimeter thick sapphire disc that has to be of much higher purity than your normal sapphire crystal, because if it's not, if there are inclusions, the process of making the mosaic inside the sapphire actually tends to make it crack. And we have a lot of cracked sapphire discs, a lot. It's done with a laser. So basically laser energy is focused within the disc. It creates a little bubble. Obviously that bubble creates some stress within the sapphire. And basically you repeat that, I think by the time you multiply it over the number of squares and the density and repetition, there's probably millions, literally millions of microscopic bubbles within the sapphire that creates that pattern. And it's on several different levels because we can focus the laser at different heights. But
so it's within the crystal, it's not on the surface.
It's not on the surface, it's inside. The bit that we're resolving is making that process consistent and figuring out which sequence in which to apply the laser to the sapphire to minimize the stress so that it doesn't crack. Theoretically, it shouldn't crack. It's just that if you do everything at once, like you've got one very opaque square, there's a high chance it's going to go pop because you're basically putting a huge amount of energy into that one point of crystal. If that crystal has any inclusions or impurities,
high failure rate then.
Very high failure rate. In fact, the failure rate is much higher than for enamel dials.
And is that a process that you have taken kind of the idea from somewhere else, or is this something that you've kind of thought you like the idea of it and then you're trying to actually bring it to life?
Well, it's a bit of both because we've used lasers in the past on the 19 series, for instance. The markings on that crystal are etched into the crystal, but that's on a single layer. It was during one of the supplier visits where basically we went and saw what they could do with lasers and sapphires and said, could you do it at different levels? Yeah, theoretically, yes. So if you can do that, let me take that away. What can I do with this, which is interesting, and then come back to it. So basically, the first mosaic is, it takes the patterns we did in the 17 series and it expands them and makes them, it combines it with the transparency of the 19 series and basically turns that into something very different, right? But the design philosophy continues through. And it's basically saying, what can we do with the new technology of today applied to the very archaic domain of watchmaking? And you'll see a lot of that bits and pieces coming through in our pieces going forwards. There's one other thing which, sorry, it's a little noisy. There's one other technology which we will use on the mosaic dials that I think is not particularly common. I'm not sure if it's been done before, but it's actually ceramic superluminova that's into the sapphire itself. So very high pigment content, very high detail. So I mean, if you have one of our watches, you know that there's the name printed or etched in the sapphire is not very big. We can make that luminous, and it is pin sharp.
So what you're saying is you're not giving your manufacturing partners easy tasks.
Oh no. The Schwartz Thein guys are good sports, but they're always very careful. Like, should we take them to visit this supplier or not? Maybe not such a good idea because they might, they might get ideas.
Yeah, they're never entirely sure what you're going to say.
If you recall, Ming was making that reference about people he knew in the past who had hair. Yeah, he wasn't sparing the production partners.
I didn't say who or why they lost it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And
there's this amazing amount of technology available out there, and you know, sometimes it's just having a little bit of imagination and asking, you know, a few questions. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
I think we have one more question as well, right?
Yeah.
we do, yes, which is actually coming from somebody you know, Lee,
Yes,
who,
Lee.
as you know, has done some drawings. So he's probably slightly
cheeky
cheekily
man,
asking,
Lee.
yes, is asking when we're going to see something sapphire cased.
Is he running out of colors? You know, that's why he needs to do something.
Yeah, cheeky man.
Yeah.
You're welcome to try and draw one. I'm not gonna stop you. But the reality of the sapphire case stuff is, I'm a bit hesitant of using it because in pictures it tends to look very plasticky, and it's not easy to make a sapphire case that doesn't look plasticky, and it's not easy to make a sapphire case. Period. I mean, everybody we've talked to, regardless of where the case is sourced from or who makes them, I mean, even for a very simple case, you're talking 10, 20,000 francs for something that is of a quality that you would expect, that's robust enough and that's properly engineered, that if you bump it, there isn't a risk that it will shatter.
I mean, great advancements.
I don't know. I don't think that represents value. I got to be honest with you. I don't think it represents value.
Or, you know, perhaps it's not something we're entirely happy with, and it's the whole package. It has to be a whole package. I mean, there's the tactile aspect to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Don't get me wrong.
it's almost.
I really love watches like that, like the Jacob Astronomias. I mean, those are amazing.
Amazing.
Right? From an engineering point of view, those are absolutely amazing.
Visual point of view.
Could we do something like that? Honestly, no, because I don't think anybody would buy it. I don't think anybody would buy it.
Yeah, it's just not a commercial decision.
No.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's most of our questions. I don't know if there's any other questions anyone wants to quickly pose before we come to the hour, or whether Kathleen has anything to add.
No, I think that's, I appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with us and give us a little bit of an insight into your.
Thank you for inviting us. Yeah.
Really appreciate.
Thanks for having us.
And I know there's quite a few people in the that are attending and watching that are fans of the brand. So really appreciate you giving us a little insight into your processes, especially the wall. The wall is intriguing.
The wall is scary. The wall is scary.
Well,
the wall is scary. The really scary thing is, I would say 50% of the wall changes every 3 months.
Don't miss a meeting. That's the instruction to team members. Don't miss a meeting.
Well, what happened was, so honestly, we've had in Malaysia, we've been under lockdown for 2 months, and our lockdown was 2 months of you can't leave the house, right? So there's nothing to do. My old computer eventually gave way, so we got a new workstation, and now suddenly there's a lot of things that I can do which are not painfully slow that I can experiment around with and start playing with. So between all that, it's been actually quite a productive 2 months. There'll be some. Let's just say there'll be some very, very interesting things coming forward, both from an engineering point of view, both from an aesthetic point of view. This year was supposed to be a very big year for us in terms of releases, because we wanted to move everything over to second generation. We were supposed to have 4 releases this year. COVID's obviously made a mess of that, and some things I think you really need to see in person. So we'd like to tour with those watches and show people and explain them. We're launching about half the lineup this year. Some of it's been postponed to next year. Some additional things have been added. So I think if you look at it as a 2-year cycle, the next 2-year cycle of our brand, there's a lot going on. I think by the time we hit the end of next year, we'll have launched something like 22 or 23 watches since we started, and it's not bad for 4 years.
That's impressive.
What did they say about idle hands again?
Keep them away from the workstation.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for answering the questions and discussing it. Really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll catch up at some point next time you're in London or New York, and we can hopefully get people, when we're allowed to finally be social again, we can have hands-on watches.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, everyone, and we'll catch up soon.
Yes.
Have a great day. Good night. Whatever.
Have a good evening.
Good morning.
Take care.
Good night.